On July 25th, CNN published an exclusive report that revealed a dramatic escalation of Chinese espionage on U.S. soil over the past decade. The report says since at least 2017, federal officials have investigated Chinese land purchases near critical infrastructure, shut down a high-profile regional consulate, that is, the Chinese consulate in Houston. The U.S. government believed it to be a hotbed of Chinese spies and stonewalled what they saw as clear efforts to plant listening devices near sensitive military and government facilities. The report also highlighted Huawei, China's biggest telecommunications company that was once poised to take over the world 5G deployment until the U.S.-led coalition stopped it. The report says the FBI uncovered Huawei equipment atop cell towers near U.S. military bases in the rural Midwest. According to multiple sources familiar with the matter, the FBI determined the equipment was capable of capturing and disrupting highly restricted Defense Department communications, including those used by U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees the country's nuclear weapons. It's unclear if the intelligence community determined whether any data was actually intercepted and sent back to Beijing from these towers. Sources familiar with the issue say that from a technical standpoint, it's incredibly difficult to prove a given package of data was stolen and sent overseas. It's significant that this report came after Huawei's 5G ambition had been shattered by the US government 2 years ago. The defeat of Huawei in 5G was a great victory on the side of the free world. Many people think the threat posed by Huawei is gone. But is it really? The CNN report refreshes these concerns. To find out the answer, I spoke with Keith Krach, former Undersecretary of State for the Trump administration, who was behind the Huawei takedown operation, about this matter and more. Do you think Huawei still poses a significant national security threat to America right now? And what should be done about it?
Absolutely, Simone. And I am sure our intelligence agencies and the Defense Department are monitoring this closely. But it should be shut down immediately. You know, Huawei is an arm of the Chinese government. They have some of the most sophisticated capabilities in the world to do all kinds of things that might not be detected. And obviously the information in that area is some of the most vital to our national security. We're talking about the nuclear arsenal. And it ranks absolutely near the top in terms of the kind of information the CCP wants. That information is priceless.
You are the person who executed the Huawei takedown operation and later expanded that approach to create the clean network. What are the essential facts you learned about China's technological aggression from that operation, and what is your core strategic response to that aggression?
Well, Simone, here's what I learned. That Huawei is the most important company to the CCP. It's the backbone for their surveillance state. They're the national champion in 5G. And, you know, this tool is a tool that, you know, the worst of dictators could have only dreamed of. You know, they use this in Xinjiang. They use it literally everywhere. They test it out in Xinjiang. They monitor all the people in China. And now they're exporting it like a dictator out of the box. And you know, it seemed 2 years ago it was inevitable that the CCP's master plan to control 5G was absolutely unstoppable. But as you pointed out, the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies ended up defeating this master plan. And, you know, the interesting thing is they've tried to use this everywhere, and they will stop at nothing. You know, the other big area, and this is Huawei has a subsidiary in this area, is underwater cable, because there you can literally tap into anything. And I'll tell you what we found out as we went around the world building that Clean Network Alliance of Democracies, which has now formed the the basis for President Biden's internet declaration is that nobody trusts the CCP, and that's their biggest weakness. And, if you look at the information that 5G networks carry, we're not just talking about a smartphone. We're talking about sanitation systems, utility grids, power systems, Internet of Things, manufacturing processes. This is vital. So, we have to stay on top of this as democracies all around the world.
I understand recently you formed the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy and the Global Tech Security Commission. I believe they are the continuation of your response to China's technological aggression. So can you tell us more of the thoughts behind these efforts?
Sure, Simone. The key to securing freedom for this next generation is securing technology. And tomorrow's tech must be trusted tech and developed by a global trust network of like-minded countries, companies, and individuals who respect the rule of law, human rights, labor practices, the environment, respect for property of all kinds, and of course, respect for national sovereignty. And, the objective is to develop the definitive global tech security strategy to safeguard freedom through the adoption of trusted technology by designing a set of sector-specific strategies, as well as taking an integrated approach that democracies can adopt to counter techno-authoritarianism. So 3 factors make up the Commission's scope. It uniquely is strategic in terms of countering those threats. First, the Commission will focus on in-depth strategies in the 17 critical tech sectors that the White House named. Those are basically the same ones that we used in the last administration, just broken up a little bit differently. And the key is to integrate those into an overarching tech strategy. The second is the scope is going to be global and also private sector led, with commissioners from international companies and institutions, and will represent more than a dozen countries as parts of democracy's common efforts to compete in this emerging technology space. The third thing is, while previous commissions have primarily focused on analysis of the problems with recommendations limited to defensive policies, the Global Tech Security Commission will integrate offensive and defensive strategies, and will be beginning to build a global tech trust network, kind of carry on that clean network alliance of democracies, as well as defining overarching tech trust standards. And the objective is to accelerate the adoption of trusted technology.
Right. One of the strategies Global Tech Security Commission features is that the scope of the operation will be global and private sector led. Why is that? Why should the private sector instead of the government lead the effort?
So first of all, Simone, the Commission's Global Tech Security Strategy is designed to complement recent multinational efforts that are led by governments to counter authoritarianism, such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the future of the Internet Declaration, as I talked about before. And by building a public-private coalition to promote democratic trust principles and digital trust standards and the widespread adoption of trusted technology, this is going to have a really, really big impact. One of the things that we're seeing is, prominent some of the most prominent board members in the United States are demanding from their CEOs a China contingency plan with the heightened risk of a conflict between China and Taiwan. There's no doubt about it that Secretary Xi looks at China as, it dispels his myth that he's created that the Chinese culture cannot live in a democracy. Nothing could be farther from the truth. And Taiwan proves that. So he wants it destroyed. And so this is kind of heighten that risk. And for democracies, Taiwan is a role model of freedom and a linchpin in that area in terms of global economic security and national security. And obviously, their semiconductor business is the top in the world, which is the most important industry. So, for corporations, if there's a China-Taiwan conflict, then, this is going to be devastating and absolutely catastrophic for the high-tech industry. So, these companies are putting together these contingency plans because they saw what happened when Putin invaded Ukraine. And they had to pull all their operations out of Russia, caused hundreds of billions of dollars. And they were totally caught off guard. And China is 10 to 20 times larger impact, more entangled. So this is really important for boards to demand this from their CEOs, because a board member's fiduciary duty is to mitigate risk. And just like you have a plan for a cybersecurity breach, you need to have a contingency plan in case there's that Taiwan-China conflict. Because if you don't, and you don't actually start on it right now, it's going to be too late. By the time, if it's after the fact. And that's why at the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, we're getting requests in terms of what do these contingency plans look like. So those are some of the areas we're helping out different corporations on.
Right. The Commission will also integrate offensive and defensive strategies, while previous commissions have primarily focused on defensive policies. Why is there such a change?
Well, the one thing I can tell you, Simone, is that the best defense is a strong offense. So, if you look back at the global economic security strategy that we put together a few years ago, there were three main pillars of that. The first one was to turbocharge our economic competitiveness and innovation. The second one was safeguard strategic assets. That would be looked at as defensive. That first one, offensive. And the third one, of course, was to build a network of trusted partners. So that is absolutely critical. A great example of what we're doing offensively is the CHIPS Act, the CHIPS Plus Act.
On August 9th, President Joe Biden signed into law a multi-billion-dollar bill boosting domestic semiconductor and other high-tech manufacturing sectors that U.S. leaders fear are being dominated by rival China.
The CHIPS and Science Act supercharges our efforts to make semiconductors here in America. This increased research and development funding is going to ensure the United States leads the world in the industries of the future. From quantum computing to artificial intelligence to advanced biotechnology, kinds of investments that will deliver vaccines for cancer cures, for HIV, invent the next gen big things that hadn't even been imagined yet.
The CHIPS and Science Act includes around $52 billion to promote production of microchips.
Because this is investing and securing the semiconductor supply chain, which all kind of began with that 5G trifecta, which was the opening salvo for the clean network, where we onshored TSMC in the largest onshore in history, $12 billion. And we, our strategy for that and our hope was that it would do three big things. One is TSMC would bring their ecosystem of suppliers, which is absolutely huge. That indeed happened. The second is that it'd spur the other semiconductor manufacturers that we're trying to get on board to invest, especially Samsung and Intel. And indeed, that happened. As a matter of fact, Samsung recently announced $17 billion additional investment in the United States. And then Intel, less than a year after we did that onshoring, they announced a $20 billion investment in Arizona, and now they're doing a 20 billion plus investment in the state of Ohio, where I'm from. So this is absolutely great. The other thing that we were hoping for, and our strategy was designed for, is that we would get universities to develop curriculum in semiconductor engineering, and also much more work in semiconductor R&D. And that is happening. At Purdue, my old alma mater, we just announced that the United States' first master's degree in semiconductor engineering. So there's a lot of investments. It really spurred that on. So that's an example of the areas where we can work together. And that's one of the reasons why, we designed a thing called the TD12, or Techno Democracy 12, where we could not only work on things like defensive things like investment screening, and those kind of and export controls, those kind of things, but also in terms of collaborating and in terms of R&D, because there's a lot of economies of scale there.
China is weaponizing big data against the West. Applications such as TikTok collects massive amount of user data. Analyzing them, generate content that tailor to individual users' interest, get people addicted, and then try to influence their political views once the app becomes indispensable to them. So what is the best way to eliminate such a danger?
Well, I can tell you one thing, Simone, that TikTok, as well as the U.S. Tech platforms, are used as a propaganda tool by China, and and why do they do that? Why do they want to sow dissension? Because there's nothing that General Secretary Xi fears more than a united United States. So to try to work both ends of the political spectrum or sow discontent, that's been their aim for a long, long time. We have plenty of evidence in open source on that. The other thing is the two big key areas is transparency and reciprocity. So if you look at that I call it the great one-way China firewall, where all the data comes in for their own use, including their military, artificial intelligence applications, as well as their social credit score. I mean, you look at that, and then, but none flows out. And then reciprocally, all the propaganda goes out, but the truth does not come in. And what they're doing is they're extending their great one-way firewall to really, export that all around the world to influence operations, influence different countries, influence different political systems. So this is something where this tech statecraft model that we developed while we were building the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies that integrates Silicon Valley strategies with foreign policy tools, all based on this trust doctrine. That's where this model works in all those different areas. So that's the key thing that we've got to do.
On one side, there is the alliance of democracies. On the other side, we start to see a China-Russia alliance taking shape quickly. In recent years, Russia and China have significantly deepened their bilateral ties, with Putin and Xi going so far as to proclaim that their countries' friendship has no limits. China and Russia share economic and security interests, an authoritarian style of government, and a common enemy, the United States. Cooperation on high-tech has become an important element of this strategic partnership, with areas of collaboration including, for example, artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, and biotechnology. Furthermore, China has also become Russia's largest supplier of semiconductors and consumer electronics over time.
Well, the totalitarian twins, they signed their love letter back there early February, right before the Olympics, this pact between Putin and Xi. And, that's where they both agreed. Hey, that was a green light for Putin to attack and this bloody war in Ukraine and commit all these war crimes, and it also Russia's back in China on Taiwan. So but the bloom has come off the roses for both these totalitarian states. I think the world has really woken up that these guys are they're up to no good, and they want to take countries' freedoms away. They're exporting that model. Now the good news is they don't trust each other, and they never will. But I can tell you who has the upper hand in that relationship. You could see it in that love letter. Is China. That's for sure. So, and by the way, that's more reason, Simone, why an alliance of democracies based on this trust doctrine, which is something that they fear so much, because they know if it's a battle that involves values and ideals, we'll win every time.
Thank you, Secretary Krach, for joining Zooming In today again.
Thanks so much for having me, Simone.